Welcome back to our series on cognitive distortions, where we talk about different distortions and how we can challenge them. If you're new here or just need a quick refresher, a cognitive distortion is a way of thinking that tends to be skewed, unrealistic, unhelpful, or irrational, that tends to lead to negative thoughts and or negative emotions. So today we'll be talking about labeling, what it is, some examples, and how to challenge and reframe that way of thinking. So without further ado, let's get into it. So what is labeling? So labeling, also known as negative global evaluations, is assigning judgment to yourself or others based upon one incident or event. Instead of recognizing you or others made a mistake, you attach a label that is exaggerated and solely based on the single incident or event, right? So essentially you are taking one thing and creating a label to then describe the whole of that person, right? Which obviously is not a full picture of who that person is. So for example, just because someone made a mistake or they may have failed at something doesn't mean that they are a failure, right? Seeing myself as a failure is not indicative of my identity and who I am, just because I may have failed at one thing or one event. So some examples of this might include things like, I'm a failure, I'm a loser, they are stupid, they are bad, this is a waste of time, this is worthless, it is hopeless, and it is pointless. So having these negative evaluations towards others might cause some level of anger or frustration or annoyance or whatever negative response that might come from it, while turning those negative evaluations towards ourselves might lead to depression, low self-esteem, and things of that sort, right? So we want to be very careful with how we label things, because it could then skew our perspective or skew our way of seeing things. It might even change our approach or understanding of things as well. Okay, so how can we then challenge this way of thinking? Well, we first want to be able to take an error or mistake and recognize that it is not always indicative of one's identity. We attribute the error to the event or the behavior instead of to yourself or to others. So we separate oneself or others from the event, and we pinpoint the error, learn from it, and grow, right? Because no thing or no one person can be summed up adequately or completely with one word or label, whether it be positive or negative. Although we can use those adjectives or those describing words for situations or behaviors, right? So for example, I can say that this behavior may have been bad, but it probably wouldn't be completely fair to then say, therefore you are a bad person, right? So again, we're able to separate the behavior from the person's identity. This person may have done a bad thing, but it doesn't mean that the person's identity is now being a bad person, right? It's just like someone doing a good thing doesn't automatically mean that they are a good person, right? There is a nuance of people are capable of doing both good things and bad things, which kind of leads us to the next point of challenging. Notice variations in behavior, in viewing people as capable of change and growth. So again, notice the variations of behavior. Sometimes people can do good things, sometimes they can do bad things, but those things are not completely indicative of their entire identity, right? There are variations in behaviors. People are capable of doing both good and bad. But not only that, but people are also capable of growth and change. So just because someone may have done a bad thing one time doesn't mean that they're always going to do that bad thing for the rest of their life, right? People are capable of growth and change. So we have to be able to account for that as well. Adopt a non-judgmental perspective on events or situations. So this kind of goes back to the idea of how are you judging this thing, right? Are you able to view things more objectively, or are you solely focused on the negative aspects of things, right? And if you're solely focusing on the negative aspect of things, you're probably going to have a very judgmental, negative judgment on this thing. Appreciating complexity in self, others, and the world, right? And again, this goes back to the idea of understanding the nuance of situations, of people, of yourself, and that we can't all just be painted in this very broad brush, very monolithic way of seeing things, but that there are nuances, there are complexities. No one is just one thing all the time, and you are not just one thing all the time. You are not always a failure. You are not always stupid. You're not always whatever the case may be. There's complexities. There's a bit more to it than just that one label. So what are some questions that we can ask that can help us challenge these thoughts a bit more? So setting aside this label for a moment, what other explanations or contributing factors might be able to explain this behavior or outcome? What evidence supports the label you are using? What evidence may contradict this label? Rather than using this label, let's be a bit more specific. Which behaviors do you feel unhappy about in the situation, and how could you change them? Suppose this label is partially true, but in a less fixed way. If you said, for example, sometimes I fail like everyone else does, but not always, what difference would that make? How does labeling yourself in this way fit within your goals? How does labeling the person or situation this way impact you? How could we describe what happened in a situation in a non-judgmental way? How would you see things differently? So let's try to take what we've learned thus far and try to apply it to a thought, and how we can reframe this labeling cognitive distortion into one that's a bit more realistic or helpful. So the example we have here is, I made a mistake at work. I'm such an idiot. I don't even know how I managed to keep this job. So first thing we need to do is, of course, acknowledge what is the single event. In this case, the single event is, I made a mistake at work. So now what is the negative evaluation that's being applied or being used as a label here? Well, in this case, it's, I am an idiot. Right? Now, because of this perspective, because this label, how does it distort our perspective on things? Well, now, because I'm an idiot, I begin to now question my ability to do my job, right? So now I'm thinking, oh man, I don't even deserve to have this job anymore. How am I even manage to keep this job if I am such an idiot? If I am so stupid? So now this negative evaluation that's been internalized as now being part of our identity is now skewing our perspective on our capability of doing things because of this label. So how can we then reframe this labeling way of thinking? So here is the reframed thought, or an example of a reframed thought. I understand that mistakes can happen. It's something that I can learn from and fix. And I know I can do a better job next time. So we see here that there is still an acknowledgement of what went wrong, right? I made a mistake. I understand I made a mistake, but mistakes happen. There also isn't this internalization of the label, right? I'm not now seeing myself as a failure. I'm just acknowledging that I failed at this thing. And I'm able to then take this as a learning experience and say, hey, I can learn from this, I can fix it, and I can grow. I can become better at my job and grow in my career because of this. And I know I can do a better job next time. So now that I have this experience, now that I know what to do, I can do a better job next time. Again, none of this is about my identity as a person, but this is all about the behavior, right? I made a mistake, I can fix it, I can do better. So it's all about the behavior, and it's not about who I am as a person. So hopefully you find this helpful in terms of being able to identify this type of thinking and challenge it as well. And of course, although I am a therapist, I'm not your therapist. So please, if you're looking for further mental health services, please find a mental health clinician in your area who can personally and specifically help you along your mental health journey. And as always, all the best.